So, what does a healthy gut microbiome look like? And I suppose that that's actually a little bit different depending on the person. Also, I'm sure there's a spectrum of healthy microbiomes. There's not one. Um, and what does that spectrum look like? What comprises it? Maybe you can give us some insight into that.
Sure. Well, up to now, certainly the last 15 years in the field, since I've been in the field, there's been a concept of diversity has been um,
That's right.
the mainstay of looking at a gut and saying, this is healthy, this is less healthy, on a spectrum. And it's been a continuum. Isn't like a sudden cutoff, but
Right.
um, we know that all, hunter-gatherers, people living in developed countries on plant-based diets have really diverse gut microbes. Hunter-gatherers in Tanzania that I visited 10 years ago have twice as many diverse species as the average American.
Mm-hmm.
So we've lost some of those. So up to recently, that was the gold standard. You just measured how many different species, or now if you do proper sequencing strains, you'd have,
Right.
and that would give you a snapshot of this. Now, we found
Let me
that,
interrupt you for a second. Hold that thought, because this idea of diversity is something that's kind of been a gold standard, as you say. And we know that the hunter gatherers, we know that when people have gone and looked at tribes that are, kind of removed from civilization, right, and they do their gut microbiomes, that they have the most diverse gut microbiomes. To your point about hunter gatherers and people that are living in the wild. So the question is, what is it about living in the wild that does that? Is it the fact that they're basically getting microbiomes from the soil and the dirt and with their hands and the food that they're eating? Is this what we're talking about? Or is it literally in the food, or is it in the environment at large? Do you have a sense of that?
well, it's both. And in a way, they're hard to distinguish, the environment and the food, because they don't go to shops, they don't have stores to go to. They just
Mm-hmm.
wake up in the morning and they pick berries off the trees, and
Yeah.
they their kids shoot the little birds. They eat anything that moves that isn't a hyena or a giraffe,
Mm-hmm.
and or snake, reptiles, and they eat about 600 different plants and animals a year,
Mm-hmm.
all of which have different microbes on them and in them when they're cooked and they're nourishing their own. But a lot of
Right.
it is the dirt and the trees and the environment and the fact they don't have chemicals anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
so nothing to kill it, and they don't have antibiotics. Although missionaries are swapping, um, you know, um, some Christianity for antibiotics, interestingly, in some of these places. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but that's the um, so I think you can't separate those two. And when I stayed there, I tested my microbiome, and uh, you know, my diversity increased by about 30% while I was there for a week. But it quickly disappeared. So these were perhaps African microbes that really couldn't then live in a sort of European environment. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why. But I think the lack of antibiotics as kids and the lack of chemicals in their food, plus this massive diversity of diet, and these are all things that we're lacking in the West that we don't
Mm-hmm.
have. So that's my view on that, on why that is. But
So,
I,
is there a way for us to compensate for that? Because I don't think many people are going to start living in a mud hut. And, although there's a real movement around regenerative farming and, a lot of really, I think, very cool initiatives, right, to kind of recreate the soil and do lots of real healthy things. And I
yeah,
think that's a nice step. But are there some things that we can do to compensate for the fact that we don't have access to the same things that they do?
well, we can really push the one thing we are in control of. If we have some financial, independence, we have, we're not on the poverty line, is to control our diets to some extent. So we
Mm-hmm.
can, um, uh, we can restrict our use of antibiotics when it's absolutely essential, and the US uses 3 times more antibiotics than many countries, say in Northern Europe, Scandinavia, etc. So it's massively overused without realizing there are consequences for our gut microbes and our immune health and our allergies, etc. Second is to improve our diets, get junk food, which is 60% of the US diet, down to levels in Mediterranean countries around 10%. So sixfold reduction in the use of junk foods, which the chemicals in them have been shown to harm our gut microbes. And then eating a diversity of plants, and this is something that we've been working with Zoe and in my books and things, is this concept of eating 30 different plants a week, which would include fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices. And it's not that hard when you start thinking about what a plant is, and you add in mushrooms and all the different types of mushrooms you can have. And, you don't need vast amounts of it. You just need that diversity.
Right.
And we think possibly fermented foods has some effect on improves gut health as well. So I think these are things that if you combine those together, possibly eat like these hunter-gatherers, with which we have time-restricted eating, so you're not snacking all the time, give your gut a rest. These are things you can compensate your gut health for. So I think they're things that all of us can do to reverse what's happened in the last 50 years. But it does mean knowing more about food and knowing which foods particularly are harmful for your gut health and which high fiber foods are really beneficial for your gut health.